Welcome to Session 2, Internal, Continuous, Unavoidable Stress, and how it plays havoc on our emotions. I'm your host, Ronald Ovett, author of this program. Now in this program, emotional resilience, living with the fruit of the Spirit, is broken into three phases. The first is emotional recognition. This is the ability to know when we are having an emotional episode. This is learning to listen to your body and senses and perceive when something is bothering you before everything goes haywire. This allows us to react before something negative happens instead of afterwards. The second is emotional regulation. This is the building the capacity to return to peace and joy and the other fruit of the Spirit from painful emotions. The ability to be who I am instead of giving in to our emotional impulses. The third is emotional relearning. This is where we take the lies that we have emotionally learned about ourselves and relearn the glorious truth emotionally. And we're now currently in phase 1, emotional recognition. In this first session, we'll be learning about internal, continuous, unavoidable stress and how the brain works and how to tune into your sensations, so you'll be able to know when you are overly stressed. It's a key to learning to be resilient. In the first introduction, we talked about life stress throughout the different stages. You see, we were made for normal stress. Our brain is equipped to handle it. However, stress that comes from trauma and the faulty alarms that it produces is an overload on our stress system. This stress causes a craving that drives us to escape. It is continuous and unavoidable stress because once we escape the stress or craving, it comes back. It's not satisfied. The addictive behavior doesn't solve the stress. It may stop the craving for a while, but the reason why we were stressed was not addressed. The triggers are still alive. The stress is still there after we escape and produces a craving, so we need to escape again and again and again. This is the effect of continuous, unavoidable stress. It will stay that way until we deliberately do something about it. Now, what causes this kind of stress? I believe that the root of most addictions, anxiety, depression, and is the misinformation that we've buried deep into our heart as a result of our childhood trauma. Now, each child is born with a need to know that they matter and belong, to be known as lovable, and that they have worth, to be safe and comforted, to be significant, to have honor, and to have a purpose. Now, these are to be instilled by the caregivers during our childhood. And if the caregivers do not provide for these needs, then there is stress. The child cannot do this for themselves. They are helpless. This produces trauma. And there's 3 different kinds of trauma. First kind is trauma caused by something happening that should have never happened. This would be different forms of physical or sexual or verbal abuse, whether inside or outside the home. The second kind of trauma is caused by something that should have happened, but did not. And that could be in the form of abandonment or neglect. Things that should have happened never happened. And then the third is trauma caused by catastrophes, right? It could be sickness or accidents, deaths in the family, and disasters. Childhood trauma can lead to emotional and brain dysregulation. And some of the symptoms of this dysregulation is
some of
the symptoms of dysregulation are explosive anger, abrupt changes in emotions, self-destructive behavior, numbing out, social withdrawal, agitated, almost a manic depression, loss of motivation, self-injury, excessive risk-taking, aggression, eating disorders, substance abuse, oppositional behavior, and a reenactment of the trauma over and over again. Now, as a child, we have needs at different stages of development. If these needs are met, then we move on to maturity. If they are not met, then we struggle with maturity and growing into adulthood. You will find in this week's lesson a survey on maturity needs. I encourage you to take it. Do the lesson. It will give you insight into emotional needs that you have left over from childhood. Stress is perceived in both consciously and subconsciously. We are aware consciously, for example, when we're hungry. However, most of our body functions like our heartbeat, digestion, breathing, they go on without us ever being conscious of it. This is the same with our stress and emotions that they elicit. Many of our emotions are the result of something going on in our mind outside of our consciousness. Fear about a doctor's declaration of cancer in your body is fully known in the present, isn't it? However, the need to people please is internal. It's continuous and unavoidable. It keeps us in this hypervigilance all the time, many times outside of our awareness. We sense it but can't quite put our finger on it. It's like feeling there's a predator in the room. It's like feeling all day that there's going to be, a pop quiz and you're not ready for it. You've had those feelings. These fears come from the interpretations of events in childhood which were interpreted through childish, immature thinking. They are often blown way out of proportion and lead us to assumptions, self-beliefs, and predictions that may have seemed true to a child, but would not stand up today as an adult. For example, it's my fault, I'm no good, if I'm bad, I will be abandoned. Unfortunately, we are still unconsciously living by them. Not just the belief, but the horrifying perceived consequences of those beliefs haunt us. I will be abandoned, therefore I'll be annihilated. Or I am not good, I will be rejected, and therefore I'll die. These beliefs and perceived consequences were set in motion as a child, and our brain took that threat seriously, and our brain continuously shields us from this impending danger. It is this extreme vulnerability that the brain considers deadly and will do anything to keep us from it. These assumptions about ourselves were emotionally learned, and they can only be changed by emotionally relearning. For example, a man or woman that thinks that they're ugly, try telling them that they're beautiful. They learn that emotionally, and they need to emotionally relearn the truth. Now here's the question. Yes, you may have had distorted thinking, but did you make an agreement with it? That is your choice. You can agree with them or start to disagree with them. The good news is that you can choose to disagree with those false assumptions today and start to become free. Part of this first phase, emotional recognition, is to catch ourselves having these negative beliefs, then catching ourselves agreeing with them. If we can catch ourselves believing and agreeing with negative beliefs, we can move on to the next section and regulate them. And then the third section where we emotionally believe the truth instead. In this way, we'll be rid of any of our unavoidable continuous stress. I encourage you to stay with this program. I encourage you to stick with it. You're going to learn a lot. You're going to be able to change a lot of the negative thinkings, those triggers that cause you to do things, that escape and do things you can't imagine you would do. They will stop as we change this unavoidable continuous stress and we learn to be free. I look forward to teaching you more.